Congressman, first and foremost, thank you for doing this. Let's first talk a little bit about, like we were saying, this is your first 100 days. You said today is officially the 124th.
124.
Talking about the last 124 days, it is, like you've said, drinking out of a fire hose. How's this experience been so far for you?
Well, especially during the whole budget reconciliation process and all of the various different committees going into markup, you have a very short period of time, and which is actually a blessing in disguise, because I always wanted to really sink my teeth into what actually happens here, and this is just one way to expedite the process. As you know, I've never ran for so much as a dog catcher before. I never was in the state legislature. I never ran for county council. So the whole legislative process is very new, but I think I bring a pragmatic, common sense approach from the private sector and a real life experience. I'm also the 7th youngest member of Congress under the age of 35, hence why I was very supportive of the idea of term limits. I love that no 20 minutes of your day are the same. It is always something new. It is always something exciting. And I really excel in fast-paced environments. So it is truly an honor and a privilege, and I'm humbled every day that I walk back into this building behind me, that I have to pinch myself and remind myself, like, how did a kid from Wyoming, Butler Street, make it to the United States Capitol? But to be able to represent northeastern Pennsylvania, that my family has called home for 5 generations, is just truly an honor.
And you said when you come on in, and there are things that you thought you wanted to sink your teeth into, things like that, and you really have kind of started that ball rolling in the first 124 days. Is there anything that you think would maybe shock the public or maybe surprise them a little bit about maybe something you didn't even think when you went in and you were able to learn now and really kind of encompass as a new congressman?
So, when you're on the campaign trail, you come here, you meet some of your hopeful future colleagues, and you spend a short period of time, but it's a lot different when you're here and you're living here and you're away from your family. And when, I grew up in Wyoming, I moved to Pittston, I went to the University of Scranton, and then having to basically reestablish a life that we're spending over 150 days a year in Washington is a lot different. I'm very used to being in tune with inside of my community and being boots on the ground every single day. But how fast-paced it is, how fast-paced the actual environment is, right? I mean, from 7 a.m. to 10, 11 p.m. every single day. So finding time to eat, finding time to exercise, and anytime there's someone from inside of our district, I really make it a priority to make myself available that I could get to speak with them or meet with them, whether it's it's a trade organization or if it's someone just coming for a tour of the Capitol. That's what really brings me a lot of joy in being able to meet with the people of northeastern Pennsylvania.
And when you say that you're meeting with them, what are some of those, if you want to say issues or challenges that they're facing, where they thought, no matter what, they think, okay, we're having a new member of Congress come in, this could be a new fresh start. What are some of the major things that you're hearing, or maybe that you didn't maybe even think of back on the campaign trail?
I'd say, I serve on transportation infrastructure. I'm the vice chairman of highway transit. I'm on the aviation subcommittee as well as FEMA public buildings. I serve on the agriculture committee as well as small business. And I asked to actually serve and volunteered to serve on a third committee because I feel that is Main Street America. That is the backbone of the American economy. It's something that I was very familiar with in my past life and our developments in downtown Pittston. And just being able to advocate for them. Obviously, they have concerns about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and what that will mean, so they can make the appropriate plans for their small businesses. But when they come on the Hill, it really kind of depends. Small business is obviously really concerned about preserving the 199A. But then we meet with our farmers, and there hasn't been a farm bill, and we need to get a 5-year farm bill done. Agriculture in northeastern Pennsylvania is a $65 million industry. We have over 1,200 farms, and 94% of those farms are family-based. It's an incredible asset in northeastern Pennsylvania, but they're struggling, and they want to make sure that their voices are heard, and that's my job, is to represent them in Washington. And being able to take northeastern Pennsylvania policies and advocate for them here in Washington is really what drives me to go and serve on that third extra committee and put that extra work in, because I want to make sure the people in our district have a viable voice. And it was to go from a 12-year incumbent to a new guy. People took a chance on me, and I have an expectation to deliver. And being the vice chairman of highway transit, surface reauthorization will be coming up towards the end of this year, and we'll be voting on it next year. But that will be an incredible opportunity to provide real results to northeastern PA.
Sure. Diving into some of those issues a little bit, let's talk about tariffs first,
Sure.
right? This is something that the president campaigned on. He is basically following through with that campaign promise now. What are you hearing though from your constituents? Because it seems like, even myself just talking to people out in the district, it's kind of a mixed emotion, where they think it might be doing something good, some feel that it's not doing something great. What are you really hearing from them when you speak to them about tariffs?
I have yet to meet a constituent, an industry inside of northeastern Pennsylvania that is immune from what is happening regarding tariffs. Now, I understand the trade inequities and understanding fair trade. Also, I understand the concepts revolving around fentanyl on the Canadian border. There was 43 pounds of fentanyl discovered, which is enough to kill the population of Ohio. It's 12 million people. I lost a 16-year-old cousin because of fentanyl, so I take it very personally. But I also am very optimistic and allowing the president to have some wiggle room to be able to operate inside of that space. And I'm very optimistic that in the very near future, there will be a resolution where some of these balances will be restored. And again, bringing manufacturing back to the United States, who's going to disagree with that? I understand the timeline it takes. I mean, you just can't click your heels together and all of a sudden now have everything that's been offshored for decades be brought back to the United States. But I think there's a way that this needle could be threaded. And ultimately, we're about making life affordable again. And what I don't want to see this happen is the end user, the American people, end up paying more for basic goods.
You're saying, of course, you can't just click your heels, and that is kind of a reality to it. But do you feel that that's what these next 4 years are really trying to accomplish? When we think about the president's agenda and also here with Congress, I mean, of course, you have the presidency, you have the House and the Senate. There's a unique thing there, it doesn't happen all the time. But do you believe that, these 4 years or even the next year or two or so, maybe some people will start to feel more of that reprieve?
100%. I think when you're talking about, again, one of the biggest industries that have taken the largest of shock loss is our farming community, our agriculture community, our small businesses. And I mean, we've heard hearing after hearing about some of the challenges and struggles with just the availability of goods. I mean, something that I saw and was speaking to some of the people inside of my company, that how fluid pricing is. I mean, we need to know where the goalpost is. We need to be working towards that goalpost. And I think the American consumer, the American industry is very resilient, but we just need to know where we're rowing the boat to and have that defined finish line. And I'm very confident that a solution is coming.
You're mentioning about your business, and of course, Hartrick Construction, has been in the area. You were CEO.
53 years.
Yep, and famously with the Route 95, right? But taking yourself out of Congress for a second and thinking about being, that business owner still, hearing these tariffs, seeing stuff like that, are you understanding also where, maybe the trepidation of some constituents would come from?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I feel it too. I mean, when you have a price quote that expires at 5 p.m. that day, and just to clarify, I don't think you can ever get the entrepreneur out of the entrepreneur. And I think that's truly an asset when you're down here. And something that I get really frustrated with is when I talk to colleagues, it's, hey, what did you do before? And you were a state treasurer and you were in the state legislature. And I'm not discrediting those careers, but signing the front of a paycheck means something. And that was something that I took a lot of pride in when we created family sustaining careers for over 200 different people and their families that were able to take that extra vacation and put food on their table. That's what I bring here, and that's what I fight for every single day. But understanding, and you're looking at your 401ks and your retirement accounts and you're seeing them go down, I am confident that we are all lockstep behind the scenes as to where this all needs to go. But again, there needs to be clarity and there needs to be resolution so we can all then work towards that goal.
Congressman, I think you kind of touched upon this before, but let's talk about a little bit with Medicaid, the budget, everything
Sure.
like that. That's been such a huge hot button issue lately. The $880 billion that it has been reported before that could possibly be cut or finding ways to cut it. Your district is the second largest in the entire Commonwealth for people
Right.
who receive those benefits. What's your stance on that when it comes to voting on bills?
Under zero circumstances will I support any legislation that guts benefits for people that deserve them. Since February 14th, I took a very public position on this. And actually just yesterday, we had a multiple hour meeting with Speaker Johnson just over there. And I'm not the kind of person to go litigate my case on the Capitol steps, because I think you can be super efficient by having meaningful discussions and dialogues and knowing where your own personal red lines are. But when you have 27.1% of your district depending on these benefits, it's a non-starter. This is a very fluid conversation on the $880 billion instruction. There's a lot that goes into the $880 billion. You have the tailpipe emissions, you have broad spectrum radio. So not all $880 billion is going to come specifically from the benefit modification or enhancements. But when you look at it comprehensively, there's a lot of different committees doing markup. Something that we just went through on transportation infrastructure was assigning a $250 fee for electric vehicles. And we think about how do we reinvest into our highways, into our bridges. It's through the gas tax. That hasn't been raised since 1993 when the Got Milk campaign was at its height. So we have to find ways to be able to reinvest into our critical infrastructure systems. And that's just one committee that I'm a part of. The Agriculture Committee is scheduled to be marked up next week. And just yesterday, the numbers have continued to evolve. Ways and Means as well as Energy and Commerce are both scheduled, but there was 22 of us that have been extremely adamant where our red lines are. That now, if you're an illegal and you're receiving benefits, if you're receiving benefits in multiple different states, if there's fraud or waste within inside of the system, it's a non-starter. We're not, I am absolutely in favor of reforming ineligible people from receiving benefits. But when it comes to the people that rightfully earn them, it's certainly not something that I'll support.
And you were mentioning, kind of having to find other types of sources for that funding then, right? Before, I believe, when you were still a candidate, you had said that you would really want to support types of bills, or at least try to make it more of a common practice where it's one issue per bill, right? And you're saying, it's not just the Medicaid and that, there's all different things.
Sure.
Is this a prime example of how that could really benefit not just here in us in Pennsylvania, but the entire country?
1,000%. And you look at these omnibus pieces of legislation and the one big beautiful bill, like preserving Tax Cuts and Jobs Act for our small businesses, for the child tax credit. I mean, these are necessary. I mean, the average American, this will be the largest tax increase in American history, and having it coupled now with all of the other ancillary moving parts. I mean, this bill was supposed to be an energy bill, a border bill, and a tax bill, period. And by the natural evolution, now it's becoming conversations about, the healthcare bill and how this thing has just grown into a life of its own. And I think we have to get back to that. And I think after our conversation yesterday with the 22 of us, those conversations were well received. There were some changes as of just this morning about FMAP and per capita cuts or per capita caps not being involved in this piece of legislation. So, I mean, it is every single day. This is evolving, and this is a member-driven process. I mean, with the majority that we have in the House right now, everybody's Joe Manchin, including myself, a freshman that's been here for 124 days, and not one voice is louder than another.
Sure. Thinking about that a little bit more, President Trump, of course, has, really campaigned on a lot of this. It seems like you guys are following through with it as well. But there's still constituents and some activist groups, things like that, especially in the 8th, that, are coming out and saying that, this is what's going to happen, or it is that viewpoint or so. What do you have to say to something like that? Or especially the Where's Rob rallies, things like that have been popping up in the last few months?
Well, I'd love to know where the Where's Rob rally that's been circulating, because just on April 22nd, on my birthday, which is Earth Day, I was at the Scranton Square picking up trash and litter. I've done over 95 public events. I am not one to hide from our constituents. I am out in the community every single day. We'll be done with votes tomorrow at 11 a.m. and I'll be back inside of the district meeting with our community. In fact, I'll be in Honesdale helping with the catastrophic flooding that just took place. We have our district director, Brian Langdon, on the ground right now. I've spoken to our state legislators. I've spoken with our borough managers, our FEMA coordinators, and we have to see where this all plays out. Hence why I introduced the bipartisan BRIC program and building resilient infrastructure. I mean, I was part of the 2011 flooding of the Susquehanna River. I sandbagged different houses along Susquehanna Avenue. I mean, having flooding and catastrophic damage, you can't outrun Mother Nature. But as for those groups, I welcome conversations with everyone. I mean, like I said, I'll be meeting with Democrats later today that are leaders inside of our community. I don't care if it's a Republican idea or a Democrat idea. If it's a good idea for northeastern Pennsylvania, I'm going to support it. I'm on the Problem Solvers Caucus. I'm on No Labels. And actually just tomorrow, right behind me, we'll be Building America about permitting reform. So, when we're talking about that Nanticoke Bridge, that under the best case scenario, the way it is currently written, if everyone ran an inside straight, that bridge will not go out to even be bid for another 6 years. And I don't think that's acceptable.
So speaking of some things that you've kind of introduced, you've been working on, one thing at the end of April, and I know you talked about this on the campaign trail too, was the term limits.
Sure.
Right? Talk to me a little bit more about that act, and I know you're saying if it does go through, you're hoping it would start in 2027, but just the importance of, kind of limiting either both, the House and the Senate to a certain amount of years.
I think I just recently turned 35, so I am the 7th youngest member of the United States House of Representatives. And I think our founding fathers would be rolling over in their graves if they saw 30, 40-year career politicians. I mean, I look at this as a public service, as a way to give back to northeastern Pennsylvania. I don't look at this as a career that you come here and you serve for decades on end. I think what's really important to take away from the term limit that I support is that, you need new ideas. You need a fresh set of eyes. It's, a familiarity has always killed the cat, and you need to be able to have challenges. And I look at this, people say, oh, Congress should be longer than 2 years. And I disagree. I think I should be accountable to my electorate. I should be accountable to my constituents. And I actually welcome running every 2 years. That, this is a job interview. And in order for me to continue to do my job, it's up to the people and to our voters and the people of northeastern Pennsylvania to decide if I'm doing what's right for them. So having the term limits, will have you govern differently, that it's not all about self-preservation and, oh, I have to do this or I can't do that. It's about doing the right thing every single day.
Sure. You were mentioning, of course, some people who 30, 40 years, and we've seen that no matter what. But thinking about that building right behind you there, and knowing that because this wouldn't just be a bill, this would be an actual constitutional amendment, the first since 1992. Do you believe that even with that type of mentality that's still kind of behind those walls, do you believe that you would still be able to receive that 2/3 majority and then also get the states on board with it? Because that's a bigger process than truly, passing a bill is a long process, but truly it's a larger one than just passing a bill.
And when you look at the building behind you and you realize the legislative process and you're just a bill on Capitol Hill, but for any member of Congress, whether it's the House or the Senate, to disagree with the concept of being able to have new, intuitive ideas to be able to serve your people and what our founding fathers have originally intended with the legislative process and the legislative branch of government, I would be remiss to find someone that would disagree with that concept. And you think about, having self-preservation and being encumbered by various different ideas. I'm beholden to no one. I'm beholden, and I always say it's the people of northeastern Pennsylvania that I'm accountable to, that I'm liable to. It has nothing to do with House leadership. It has nothing to do with the administration. It's about what's right for our district. And looking at how one of the executive orders that I'd come out in support of against was about our federal workers being able to collectively organize. 2.94% of our workforce, over 10,000 workers, are federal workers between our prisons, between Tobyhanna Army Depot, and they're worried. And seeing all of a sudden the Social Security Administration buildings listed for auction, I had found out about that right before I walked into a hearing. And during that hearing, my questions were very pointed and we'll call them spirited. And the very next day, our buildings were removed from the auction list. But it's about being able to fight and not being able to fall in line and doing what's right at the end of the day.
Talk to me a little bit then, we'll switch gears here, but talk to me a little bit again about the Trust Act that you've introduced now with this stock trading.
So, I've said from the get-go, I don't trade my own stocks, I don't manage my own portfolio. And it's about having trust in Congress, and it's about having, and I'm actually going to take it a step further by incorporating a blind trust into my assets. And you have to remember, I had a business before. Since I was the age of 19, I've been involved inside of my family business. So I thought it would be appropriate to add another layer of insulation to say, hey, listen, I truly don't have anything going on or any conflicts of interest, but the people in northeastern Pennsylvania need to know that I'm fighting for them and not my, a stock portfolio or a special interest. So, you see every single day, both Republican and Democrats. There's another bill that was introduced, the Pelosi Act. And I'm all for working with other members that have an interest in being able to enable the public trust that we're here for the right reasons. I know that's why I'm here.
You were mentioning about your own stocks and everything. And this might be a personal question, but did you have your own portfolio coming in? Because when you look at a site like Capital Traders, right, as a constituent, you think to yourself, okay, this seems a little odd that you would want to introduce a bill like this, but it shows that from January that stocks have been traded. Can you clarify that a little?
Absolutely. I mean, I've had a portfolio since I was young. I remember, when I was a kid, my grandfather and I had set up an account. I have a 401k. I have a Roth IRA, just like millions of other Americans that rely on financial advisors and brokers. I mean, that's what they do. Look at a retirement account and how a plan is administered. I think, by sheltering it or covering it up is going to be way worse than just being transparent. It's like, hey, this is what I have. I mean, if you ask me right now what stocks I own, I would not be able to answer that question. I look at the PTR report that gets filed, and what's really important to know here is that there was no alleged violation of the Stock Act. I've been following the rule of the law and taking it a step further, but in order to be able to establish a blind trust, it has to go through the House Ethics Committee. The language needs to be approved. And like I said, I've been here for 124 days, drinking through a fire hose, bringing in the reconciliation process. But what's important for people to know at home, it's for the people of northeastern Pennsylvania, and this will add another layer of insulation to say, hey, now none of us have any idea what's happening here, and that's truly the way it's always been since I've been here.
I think part of the bill, if I'm correct, is that if you're coming in with yourself and your spouse, and you had some type of stock or anything before, that's grandfathered in.
Right.
But if there's a blind trust, that's exempt. Is that correct?
It's true, but I took it a step further. That's why my bill was exactly that. If you came in with different assets and a 401k or a Roth IRA or a retirement plan, and you have a local LPL advisor or a local institution that manages your funds, you can't just throw that away. And again, this is meant for people to serve their country. I mean, everybody's had prior lives, and I think, like I said, it's an asset that you've actually had prior experience in the world before coming here. But that's the difference between my bill and a lot of other bills that have been circulating around. But I'm taking it a step further and taking the initiative to encapsulate everything into that blind capacity.
And you're saying this about, the bills you've introduced, and we've talked about a few, and I know there's more, right? There's more that you've done. I'm sure there's more you're working on. And like you said, a congressional term, or at least a member of the House is only 2 years. And a lot of times it's thought of as, you come in and you're kind of up for re-election again, right? That's kind of the process.
But if you do the right thing every single day and you represent your people, I don't look at it as running. I look at it as doing your job.
So, but my question then would be just, is your goal for a lot of these, because it sometimes seems like, when bills are introduced, and again, knowing just the politics behind the walls there, right? It could take some time. Is your hope that at least some of them will be passed within this session and hopefully signed into law by the president?
So simplifying veterans survivorship benefit forms was just passed through the VA committee yesterday. So that is hot off the press, and that has been fast-tracked, and that's a great idea. Who's going to disagree with going through 10, 20, 30, 50 pages of documents to be able to get the benefits that you deserve? So that's something that I feel extremely optimistic about. I'm not a person just to introduce legislation just to be able to say, oh, I introduced this piece of legislation with the idea of it not moving anywhere. I don't think that's super effective legislation, as a legislator, I don't think that's very beneficial. But I'm very optimistic about and that was our first bill that we introduced. We've introduced Eric's Law about incorporating getting rid of biased juries relevant to capital murder cases inside of our federal penitentiaries. And obviously, the brick reform. Our communities depend on those, and I think there's a really viable opportunity that whether it's the brick program itself that is preserved or there's a different name for it, I do feel very optimistic that will be coming back in some capacity.
I guess my last quick question for you is, thinking about your time so far, like you said, 124 days, is there anyone or a group of people, whoever it may be, that are here that, maybe they are a little bit more of the experienced ones, or maybe it's a group of you that are all brand new, that you really have kind of bonded with, been able to join together and really kind of network and use to your advantage? I get along with a lot of different people. I don't really have enemies down here. I think we all fight for our districts and we all care about the people that we represent. I'm on the Problem Solvers Caucus, so Brian Fitzpatrick out of the Bucks County area is someone that I see frequently. There's a group of us, like I said, that we're meeting with the speaker that, are moderate, that are reasonable, that are common sense people. And, sometimes it's more of a line in the sand, or having those dialogues and those conversations.
But I wouldn't say that there's one member. I mean, I'm incredibly close with Leader Scalise. I mean, House leadership has been wonderful. They all came to my district. They saw who we represent, and they understand why I fight for what I fight for. But I think seeing is believing, and as well as knowing why we're here. It's for the people of northeastern Pennsylvania.